My name is Clinton Corners. I am 35 years old, and at the beginning of this story, I was confused and angry. However, these were the only things I knew about my situation. Of course, there were other things going on in my life, but at that moment I was blissfully unaware of how stupid I was. Looking around the small airport terminal, I was still amazed how my boss convinced me to be there at that moment, doing what I was doing. It was an autumn Friday morning, the day after Thanksgiving, and everyone else in our company, like most Americans, was relaxing. Yet here I stood in this tiny terminal, waiting for an even smaller plane that would take me north to Canada. My goal was to make a deal with a small Canadian manufacturing company that could subcontract the production of our parts. The company, North Star Manufacturing, supposedly had the latest state-of-the-art CNC and robotic systems that were more advanced than what we had in our area. According to what I could gather from people working with them, the company only had 5 or 6 employees. I wasn't entirely sure how such a small company could handle the volume of parts we needed, but my boss insisted that I go and study their work. I still remember the conversation that distracted me from the celebrations the night before. In a way, I was glad for the distraction. 8 of us, me, my wife Kathy, my brother Chuck, and his wife Annie, my parents and Kathy's parents had just started discussing my mother's favorite topic. "So when will I get grandchildren from you too?" she asked. Her question prompted Katie's mother to join the discussion in full agreement. Everyone looked at me. The smirk on my father's face told me that he was enjoying watching me squirm under my mother's relentless questions. Just as I started to open my mouth to shift the blame onto Katie, the phone rang. Katie rushed towards him with almost supernatural agility, taking the phone with her into the kitchen. Her smug smile made me realize that she had deliberately left me to my mother's interrogation. However, just a few seconds after her triumphant departure, she returned to the room, frowning. "This is for you, honey," she said, handing me the phone. "This is Frank." Frank stood for Frank Walters, my boss and owner of the engineering company I worked for. Only Frank could call me on a holiday during dinner. Frank lived, ate, and breathed work. He was probably already tired of all his relatives and decided to contact me to continue discussing his next project. For the first time, I was glad that he thought of me. "Yes, Frank. Happy Thanksgiving to you too," I said into the phone. "Clint, my boy, I've been thinking," he said. "Listen, I don't want to ruin Turkey Day for you, but I need you to come to the office tomorrow morning. I have another brilliant idea." Even when I hung up the phone, I knew I was going to hate his brilliant idea. But I used this call as a distraction. I pretended that I needed to go to our home office to get an important email. Alone in the office, I checked my personal email and played a few games until I heard the sounds of at least one parent getting ready to leave. I made it downstairs just in time to see the door closing behind them and my parents getting ready to leave as well. "I can't believe he's calling you on a holiday," my father said. "What a slave owner." "Yes, but someday I will lead the company," I said. "He has no sons and his daughter is not interested in business." "She'll probably marry someone who will," said the father. "It's unlikely to happen," I said. "She stands firmly on the side of the gays." "Well, maybe her partner will be interested in business after all," said the father. "It doesn't matter," I replied. "Frank is such a homophobe that he would never hand over a business to a girl who is into girls." "I just hope Frank appreciates all the dedication and commitment you show," my father finally said. Anyway, this morning I found myself in Frank's office listening to him explain this little trip to Canada to me. Completing this trip will earn me a bonus and a company-paid trip to Hawaii for me and Katie. One of the things I liked about Frank was that he demanded a lot from his employees, but also gave a lot in return. This trip, for example, he arranged for me to fly on a small private business jet. It was a first-class luxury aircraft that could accommodate no more than 15 passengers at a time. I will avoid long check-in lines. All seats on the plane were comfortable and well-appointed, and I won't have to avoid or deal with screaming children or problem passengers. Frank also arranged for me to stay in a first-class hotel with all the amenities. He even said that I could take Katie with me. Katie looked at me with sympathy when I told her about it and just shook her head. "It won't work, cowboy," she smiled. "I love you to bits, honey, and I hate that you have to do this on your day off. But remember, you're working hard now so that later, when we're older, we can retire early and travel the world together. However, tomorrow is Black Friday. I won't miss all the sales to wander around Canada with you, so call me often and get back to me as soon as possible, but I won't go with you." The whole day had gone smoothly so far. There was no snow yet, which was unusual for November in Michigan. Temperatures were in the upper 40s and low 50s, so I took advantage of the situation and still drove my Mustang. I liked that the airline offered indoor, secure parking. This made me feel confident that my Mustang would be safe and looked after while I was away. I was only going to be away for 2 days, but I was still worried about my car. However, with this concern, everything was taken care of, and all I had to worry about was the task ahead. The procedure for boarding the plane was different. I simply showed up in the hangar at the moment when the plane was about to take off. There was no ticket. I simply showed my driver's license as proof of identity. The woman checked my name on the list, and I boarded the plane. There were already several people on the plane. The two of them, sitting separately, were typical business types in dark suits. Both were already sitting with their laptops and barely glanced when I entered the salon. Another couple was clearly a businessman and his secretary. They seemed to be traveling on business. However, their expressions told a different story. There was a gray elderly woman reading a magazine, and finally, a couple of guys who appeared to be some kind of technicians. I sat in the middle of the plane, mainly because it was away from everyone else. A few moments after I boarded, a loud old man with two young men who were clearly his subordinates came on board. They loudly discussed everything that came to their minds. Several other passengers looked up, but the eldest of them only glared back. He was clearly too rude to care about the discomfort of the people around him. Just as the woman with the list checked it again and did a visual roll call, another woman slid through the doorway. Almost every head turned when she entered. She didn't look like Katie at all. She was unlike any girl I had ever dated. Katie was taller, slimmer, more my type. Or at least that's what I thought until now. But in less than a second after seeing this woman, my opinion changed. I also felt a flash of anger. After I saw her, Katie suddenly seemed incomplete. Or to put it in third-grade math parlance, my wife suddenly seemed less. Suddenly, Katie's firm and perky breasts weren't enough anymore. A couple of years ago, Katie had breast augmentation surgery. She didn't make them anymore. Most of the women in Katie's family had these saggy, upside-down, flat breasts. Katie didn't make them bigger, just fuller. She wasn't worth it. The woman who just came on board made all these types and comparisons irrelevant. Although she was completely covered up to the neck, it was impossible to hide the amount of flesh under her blouse. Although it was clear that she was wearing a bra that was probably designed by a design engineer. As she turned to look for a seat, all the blood in my brain instantly rushed to the other head. Her bottom was wide and seemed to be missing something. Of course, it was plump and round to the point that it seemed juicy. But I really felt like he was missing my hands. Constantly, even sitting there, my hands were clenching as I imagined squeezing and caressing that ass. Her legs, plump and graceful, served for more than just movement. They were the guardians of the promised land. In that moment, I saw myself spreading those gorgeous legs to get to what I really wanted. All this abundant loveliness was packed into a woman who was only 5 feet 2 inches tall, if that. However, these curves and what they promised faded before her eyes. Even from across the room, those eyes attracted me. I was locked in her gaze like a moth to the flame. It was only when I realized I had to look away. The intimacy of our eye contact was wrong in its intensity. I realized that I had deceived myself. Every man on that plane, and some of the women also thought that she had eyes for them, and them only. Sitting there dazed, with growing anger, the loud-voiced guy was already on his feet and heading towards her. His sneer turned into a disgusting expression as he approached her. but she was much faster at understanding than anyone in the room. Before he could clear his throat to speak, she turned abruptly and sat down in the seat next to me. "Is there someone sitting here?" she asked. I was too stunned to curse. I quickly shook my head, indicating that no one was sitting. Her voice was more musical than anything that had been released since Motown. Again, I felt a flash of anger. It wasn't directed at her. No, the anger was directed at himself. At 35 years old, I had never thought about cheating on Katie until that day. I just wasn't the type of person to leave my responsibilities. But from the moment she stepped on that plane, all the stupid love songs I'd heard my entire life suddenly made sense. What made it even worse was that I was sure that she didn't feel even the slightest bit of excitement that she caused in my mind, spirit, and pants. The loud-voiced guy returned to his charges, giving me a look that could melt tungsten. "Would you like to sit by the window?" I asked timidly. "Why not, dear?" she smiled. "I always like to see where I'm going. You're such a nice young man." Until that moment, I had never thought about her age. At that point, I began to wonder if age matters when it comes to women. Damn, let's be honest. Beauty is beauty, and a woman of such beauty transcends her age. However, it made me wonder how old she really is. Returning to my generous act, I actually gave her the window seat so she could be all mine for the short duration of the flight. If she was sitting in an aisle seat, half the plane might come over to chat with her. But this way, I had it for myself, and everything would have been much more comfortable. As the plane's engines began to get louder, I looked at her carefully. Many questions arose in my head. How old is she really? What does she do? I saw several small rings on her slender fingers, but not a single wedding or engagement ring. At that moment, the ring, securely attached to my left fourth finger, suddenly became heavier and hotter. Focusing on the ring and the image of Katie, faithful, waiting for me at home, I was able to tear myself away from the woman next to me and pull out my iPad to look up information about the company I was about to visit. As the plane began to move down the runway, I tried my best to focus on my work and not on the woman next to me. I also told myself that I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't even touch this woman. I didn't do anything to hurt Katie. All I did was get a little lost in my thoughts. My marriage was still as secure as it was this morning. I didn't really betray Katie. Besides, what she doesn't know won't hurt her. Katie, what he doesn't know won't hurt him, I told myself. It was just a momentary pang of guilt. I've experienced them many times over the years, so experiencing it alone with Kyle quickly approaching me was nothing new. I usually dealt with them by being extra loving towards clients for a few days. Most people I know think Clint and I have the perfect life. We have all the attributes of a successful couple. We have a beautiful house. I chose it, and Clint works like hell to make sure I have almost everything I need. We will be adding a couple of children to our lineup in the near future. And in the end, we will retire rich, fat, and happy. Maybe we'll travel and see some of those exotic places everyone always talks about. Or maybe we'll just keep doing whatever makes us happy. Most people I know would be horrified to know what I do. The thought of me having affairs, or even one affair, would paint me as some kind of scarlet woman. Okay, let's be honest. They would declare me the worst available girl to appear in our city in a millennium. But in the real world, all my friends would immediately start hunting for my husband. Singles would try to get into his bed before my scent disappeared from the sheets. Married women would spend a little more time. Most of my male friends would start aiming to be the next one to sleep with me if they could do it without being noticed. None of them would want to marry me, but they would all want to sleep with someone available for a change. Most people I know are sheep. They go through their lives with their eyes closed. They want all the things that everyone else wants. There is not a single original thought among them. They live their lives according to some old saying, happy wife, happy life, and all that crap. The problem was that I wasn't happy. Not at all. I married Clint with the best expectations. However, somewhere along the line, I was simply tired of being second or maybe even third in his life. Frank was number one. Maybe not even Frank, but just the damn job. My husband was not as dedicated to my happiness as he was to his job. Giving me all the things he gave me was just a byproduct of his success at work. But after a while, things stopped making me happy. I craved attention, and if it didn't come from my husband, well, if you can't be with the one you love. Kyle ran up to me as if he was dying without me. I missed you so much, he said. Oh God, Kyle, I smiled. You act like I'm the only one on the planet. As for me, it is, he said. At least that's the only one I'm interested in. How long do we have? At least 2 days, I said, maybe 3. We ran up the stairs. He grabbed me at every step. When we got to the top, he followed me into the bedroom. We both started shedding our clothes as quickly as if our lives depended on it. When we finished, I did what experience should have taught me to avoid. I let him talk. So, is the car in the garage? He asked. No, I answered. He drove it to the airport. Does that upset you? Well, no, he said. Disappointment colored his words. And to think I thought you only wanted my body, I said. But I'm starting to think you really want to get to my husband's car. No, he said quickly. It would just be fun. You always say he never lets anyone drive it. It would be another thing he shares with me without knowing it. The ringing of the phone interrupted our conversation. I grabbed my phone from the table next to the bed. After a short conversation, I turned to him and told him to get out. I thought I was staying a couple of days, he whined. Both my mom and my mother-in-law are heading here, I said. And none of them are stupid. I'll call you when I get back. We're going shopping. He got dressed and left without a word. I spent the day spending Clint's money and hearing 2 old ladies tell me how much Clint loved me. My sense of guilt grew with every statement they made. I ended up having dinner in town with my mother's after we finished shopping. As usual, my guilt led me to buy more Christmas gifts for Clint than I had planned, and I again thought about our future together. I don't think I really knew what I wanted. I had no idea if I loved Clint. All I knew was that I loved the lifestyle his work gave us, and whether I loved him or not, I wasn't ready to give it up. I'm very attached to Clint, and I never want to hurt him. I thought again, maybe divorcing him would be the kindest thing I could do. I decided again that divorcing him would be stupid. Neither of us wants this. Clint loves me with all his heart. Divorce would only hurt him, and it would hurt me. At 35, I was no longer a young girl. I've seen how bad things are for most women I know after divorce. Most of them end up failing in many ways. They became prey for men who used them only for sex and robbed them of much of their dignity. They also went from managing 100% of a man's income to managing maybe 40% if they were lucky, and most of them ended up losing their homes and having to find work. I felt great pity for those who remarried. They usually put up with a lot of crap just to keep a man who was never as good as their first husband. The only reason they did it was because it was better than being alone. Those who never remarried were the most miserable. They became lonely old women with a house full of cats who dreamed of spending the night looking after their grandchildren. And even if I divorced Clint, other than unhappiness, what would it bring me? Kyle. Damn, I'm not that stupid. First of all, I don't like Kyle. I just love the attention he gives me. Kyle, even at 27, is not fit to wear my husband's sweatpants. Kyle has no job, no prospects, and never went to college. There's no way he could ever support me. Kyle dreams of becoming the next successful white rapper. I've heard him rap, and he's terrible. I don't know anything about hip-hop music, but I know it's not good. If I had my back to the wall, I could probably beat Kyle in a rap battle. The second reason I don't like him is that I'm not stupid. I know that despite his protests, the main reason Kyle is with me is the money I give him. Of course, sex is sex, and he takes it because I give it to him. But Kyle doesn't love me any more than I love him. I was lost in my thoughts for so long that I didn't notice the time passing, so it came as a surprise to me when my mother-in-law mentioned how late it was already. "We better get you home so you can be there when client calls," she said. My mother agreed. In fact, Clint could and should have already called me on my cell phone. even if it was just a quick call to let him know he had arrived. When I returned home, he still didn't call me. I started to worry. I went through everything in my head. We didn't quarrel, and he kissed me as if he didn't want us to separate that morning. He even asked me to go with him again. As far as I knew, he wasn't mad at me, so why didn't he call? At that moment, my cell phone rang, and I quickly answered. "Darling, why didn't you call for so long? I was so worried," I said into the phone. "You told me not to call," Kyle replied stupidly. "I'm outside, freezing. May I come in?" Clint had never gone this long without talking to me before, especially when he was away. I tried to think of reasons why he might not call, but I couldn't find any. Canada was not third world without telephone service. Maybe he found out about Kyle. I didn't think it was like that. Clint was an honest man. If he had found out about Kyle, he would have been killed. He would have bumped right into me and everything would have come out. He just loved me too much to play games. The only thing I could come up with was that he immediately went to meet new clients and they treated him to food and he lost track of time. I opened the door and called out to Kyle, who was hiding in the bushes outside, shivering and freezing. As soon as he slid inside, I noticed that my neighbor, Ethel, was watching me like a hawk. I'll have to come up with a good excuse for what she saw before Clint gets back. Kyle immediately entered the house and began taking off his clothes. I decided to put my worries about Clint aside until the next day. However, no matter how hard I tried, I could not enjoy sex with Kyle. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. After a while, Kyle gave in and started talking. "So, your husband thinks you're upset about him leaving?" He laughed. "Yes," I replied, trying to keep the conversation to a minimum. "What a fool," said Kyle. "Yes," I echoed. "What a fool. Imagine this idiot loves me so much that he hates leaving me. He even begged me to go with him. How stupid must he be to love someone like me?" "Very stupid," Kyle agreed, not realizing I was being sarcastic. "He doesn't even understand that you love me and not him. I laugh every time I think about how he works to buy you things and give you money so you can give it to me. It's like he's paying me to sleep with you." I was so quiet after his words that even Kyle realized what he had done. "Of course I'd sleep with you for free," he said, trying and failing to correct his mistake. I would even pay money to have sex with you," he blurted out. "If only I had money." I think we both knew it was a lie. "Okay, let's figure it out," I said. "Do you think I'm a woman who will take money for sex? So you think I'm an easy girl?" "No, darling. This is not where I was going," he muttered. "So where were you going, Kyle?" I asked with a growing realization of what a fool I had been. "As soon as I get a record deal, I'll take you out of here," he said. "It'll be you and me against the world, darling." I think that's when I realized how big of a fool we both were. I knew for sure that if Kyle ever received more than $10, he would immediately spend it on some 20-year-old black girl without hesitation. He was a fool for not realizing that I knew him better than he did. At the same time, I was also a fool. I had everything I ever dreamed of, but I risked it all every time I let that fool between my legs. In that moment in the dark, with this emotionally immature, forever child in my husband's bed, I finally realized how broken I was. I finally understood why Kyle was there. Kyle was just a way for me to get back at Client for not putting me first in his life. I was too much of a coward to really confront Clint about it. I didn't want him to quit his job and find another one that would give him more time for me, especially if it might not pay as well and would end up forcing me to get a job to help out. No, it was much less brave, but much easier to just express my disappointment in letting someone else have what Clint thought was his only one. Delilah. When the plane took off, I panicked. I've never flown on such a small plane before. Usually, I prefer to go by car. I hate flying. And when I absolutely must fly, it's usually on a large commercial airliner. However, this time it was impossible. I returned home to visit my last remaining relative, Aunt Alice. I spent Thanksgiving with her at her nursing home. She didn't look very good. Maybe I should think about moving her back to Michigan. My Aunt Alice was also the only one of my relatives who didn't judge me when she found out what I was doing. My job or career, or whatever you want to call it, was what got me on that little plane. I was heading to Toronto for a temporary job. For me, temporary jobs were very rare. I primarily served what I considered a niche market. No one was more shocked than me that I was able to make money from this. There seems to be nothing more diverse in tastes, especially nowadays. 20 years ago, I would have had no chance. However, today it seems that everyone not only allows, but also indulges their inner quirks. The plane began to shake and vibrate as it left the ground. There was also a not-so-distinct metallic sound as we tried to gain altitude. Was this normal? I didn't think so, but no one else seemed to notice. It reminded me of the sound my car made right before it broke down. My panic increased, and I grabbed the life preserver. I got used to the reaction my body caused. This was one of the reasons why I tried not to draw attention to myself. They say that we live in an enlightened age. Women have more rights than ever. Women can own businesses. And we're very close to being paid equally to men in most industries. In some, we even earn more. If a woman works in a company and experiences stares or any inappropriate behavior, basically anything that makes her feel uncomfortable, she can file a complaint with the HR department and accuse the company or a specific person of sexual harassment. It's funny, but even though a woman is safer in the workplace, she can still be attacked and insulted on the street in public. From the moment I boarded the plane, I was under surveillance. Most of the men there, and even a few women, openly stared at me. I was used to this from men, but women made my skin crawl. They say that women have a kind of radar about their bodies and what parts they look at. It felt like there were at least a dozen small insects crawling across my chest. And on the left, I felt it. I turned my head and met the gaze of the predator. I have met many such men in my life. He was clearly the type of person who would try to use me as a piece of meat and nothing more. I looked around and found the opposite. Right in front of me, I met the softest, kindest brown eyes I've ever seen. He also looked at me, but his look was different. Although it was obvious that he valued my body, he felt guilty about it, and there was something else in that look. This look was not only warm, but also caring. It was clear that he was not the kind of person who would force me or anyone else. Even as the predator jumped to his feet and walked towards me, I moved towards safety and sat next to him. Up close, his eyes were even more welcoming, and what he did next could not have been better, even if I had written the script myself. He offered me a seat by the window and placed his body between me and the wolf. I felt like I was in a cocoon of warmth and protection. However, as quickly as it started, it ended so quickly. He seemed to be immersed in some kind of internal conflict. Or maybe he was just shy and didn't want to invade my personal space. I wondered if it might just be his style, the lone knight who makes random saves and then disappears. However, I had something to think about, so I let the thought go. It only lasted 4 seconds until the plane took off and I heard that clang. I grabbed his hand with all the strength I could muster. I wrapped my arm around his. This pinned my hand between his muscular arm and his very thin chest. Unfortunately, it was. Tit for tat as his muscular arm was sandwiched between my soft, meaty upper arm and my even softer chest. He instantly realized where his hand was and froze. I almost thought his eyes would roll back in his head. I'm also pretty sure he's horny, which is something I'm a bit of an expert on. I'm scared, I said through chattering teeth. What he did then was amazing. He untied our hands, but held my hand. His grip was gentle but firm. "Don't be afraid," he said. He had the biggest smile. I was sure that if there was such an opportunity, I could get lost in those eyes. But what do I know? At 47 years old, I was in love only once, and he had 2 left legs. "Flying is the safest way to travel," he said. "If that's the case, why is it that when a car gets into an accident, only 1 or 2 cars are damaged and most people come out of it unscathed?" I asked. "But when the plane crashes, everyone on board looks like their bodies have been put through a meat grinder and the damage spreads across 3 counties." You're exaggerating, he smiled. Besides, we won't fall. I think we just hit a few air pockets. Usually, it is only difficult during takeoff and landing. The rest of the flight will be so smooth that you won't even notice that we're moving through the air at over 300 miles an hour in a beer can with wings, I spat out. This thing is made of aluminum. Remember 20 years ago when beer cans were made of steel? Back then you had to be a very strong man to crush the can. Now even little girls can crush one. Why the hell do they make planes out of something so fragile? I was so excited that I let my hands move in all directions as I spoke. This made my breasts jiggle, and within moments, all the men around us, especially the wolf and his pups, were looking at me. I'm Clint, he said softly. I promise I won't let anything happen to you. Delilah, I said, returning his smile. I'm going to hold you to your word. He told me about his trip and what he was doing on this flight. He talked about his business and, unfortunately, his wife. As we sat holding hands as the plane cut through the air like an aluminum rocket, all my fears evaporated. I was no longer afraid, but I wasn't going to let go of his hand. I lived in the moment and had no intention of letting it go. Despite what I did in life, I was always a good girl. However, I was ready to let it all go. If this man asked me to join the Mile High Club, I was ready. I didn't care that he was married or anything. For more than an hour, I was content to just listen to him. He made me laugh and feel special. But most of all, for the first time in as long as I could remember, a man made me feel like more than just a pair of big breasts. The amazing thing was that after we started talking, his eyes never left mine. He mentioned my blue-green eyes several times in conversation, and every time he did, I felt a shiver between my legs. I almost got angry when the flight attendant, or whatever she called herself, interrupted us to tell us that we were on schedule and would be landing in an hour. She told us that a storm was approaching, and although the plane was flying fast enough to outrun the storm, we would probably need warm clothes during our stay in Canada. I noticed that during the entire conversation with us, her eyes constantly moved from my breasts to his eyes. The bitch clearly didn't know if she wanted to have sex with him or me. Hell, maybe she wanted both of us. I rejected her with one of those rude hand gestures. It wasn't something I usually did, but I wanted to enjoy every moment with Clint. Even the air seemed sparkling. It was one of those perfect moments that fate gives us once or twice in our lives. And as soon as she walked away in anger, the wolf returned. Hey, baby, you should look at the view from the other side of the plane, he said. For what? I asked. Isn't this side of the plane flying over the same land? Well, yes, he said, but maybe the company would be better. I doubt it, I said. You know, my eyes are up here. They have a strange structure. My eyes are above my neck on my face. Think about it, or better yet, just go back to your seat. She must be into women, he spat, addressing no one in particular. Oh, good, the flight attendant said happily. She winked at me. Before I could express my disgust, there was another one of those clanging noises I had heard earlier. But this time it was so loud that everyone heard it. Suddenly, the plane veered sharply to the left and fell a long distance before leveling off. But even as the plane tried to return to its correct position and altitude, we heard several more bangs and clanks and noticed through the window that fire was engulfing the jet engine attached to the left wing. Everything went wrong. I couldn't focus on my own thoughts because some stupid bitch was screaming at the top of her lungs. Clint covered my mouth with his hands to let me know that I was the one screaming. I climbed over the armrest separating us and found myself in his lap, pressing against him as hard as I could. I couldn't help but notice how good he felt. The plane began to rock, first one way, then the other, and it was clear that we were falling, and falling quickly. I was still screaming, and Clint stopped listening to me. He looked at everything around us. He grabbed my hand in an iron grip and pulled us forward 2 rows. Please, sir, sit down, the flight attendant shouted. Clint pushed us into the row of seats he was watching. He pulled out a couple of pillows from somewhere and bent me forward. Keep your head down, Delilah, he said calmly. He squeezed my hand and smiled at me. I was terrified. I was ready to scream again, but he did something that shocked me even more than the fact that I was about to die. He kissed me, and amidst all this turmoil of approaching death, my mind recorded this kiss. Before I had time to realize it, he sharply tilted my head down and threw himself on top of me. The plane hit something, and there was a sound like 1,000 explosions at once. Metal could also be heard tearing or tearing. The world around us turned upside down. The floor suddenly became the ceiling, and then the floor again. The seats in front of us were compressed from the pressure of the impact and the pressure of the seats being pushed forward by inertia. Between the crew, flight attendants, and passengers, there were probably about 20 people on board the plane. They all seemed to be screaming at the same time. The final blow was so strong that it knocked the wind out of me, and then everything went dark. Katie. I woke up in the middle of the night. The room was completely dark. A loud noise was heard. It was coming right next to me. Once I shook off the drowsiness and brain fog, I realized it was Kyle. He snores louder than a lawnmower. His snoring would be funny if I didn't have to try to sleep through it. I also realized something else. They say body language is everything. Our involuntary habits and movements are windows into our true feelings. They are believed to be a better barometer of what we think and feel than what we say, and sometimes even more accurate than what we think. In my sleep, Kyle rolled over as far away from me as possible, and I also turned away from him. Clint always ended up with his arms wrapped around me. Even when we were fighting or not talking to each other, we somehow fell asleep in each other's arms. I always felt so safe and warm when we slept together. No matter what we argued about, it never seemed so important after the night we spent together. At that moment, I realized that I felt lonely and worried. Why the hell should I feel alone with this 6-foot piece of meat next to me? Maybe it was a message from my subconscious that Kyle meant nothing to me. I sat in the dark trying to figure out what I wanted and where my life had gone wrong. When I married Clint, I was sure that I loved him. And I think, deep down, I still love him. I just hate being second only to his damn job. I know he thinks he needs to work so hard so we can have everything we want. He also needs to make sure we have enough money and resources to retire comfortably. However, in truth, I would prefer that he work less or find a job that gives him more free time so that we can spend more time together. If he could do that, there would be no more Kyles. Another thing I had to consider was that, in truth, I had been less than fair to Clint. It wasn't hard for me to tell him when I wanted him to buy me something or take me somewhere, but I never once told him how I felt about his work. I think this is because, to some extent, men tend to identify with their work. A man's work means a lot to how he sees himself. Women tend to identify more with marriages and families. So maybe I was afraid that if I told Clint that he had to choose between me and Frank, I might not like the answer. I also wondered if this was actually fair. Clint spent every free moment with me. I have a lot of activities to fill my time. I have many friends and things that I do for fun. Outside of work, poor Clint has only 2 interests. I'm in first place, and his Mustang is in second. Clint loves this car. He never lets anyone touch her. A tear rolled down my cheek in the darkness. He loves this stupid car so much. He worked hard to earn the money to buy it, but he didn't even think about buying it until he bought me the car I wanted. It was his choice, and he chose to buy my car first. Regardless of his work, this stupid man loved me. Okay, maybe he loved his job a little too much, but he loved me more than anything else in the world. Why didn't I notice this? Was I really just a spoiled brat, as my parents often claimed, and I was all too ready to hand over the keys to Clint's Mustang to Kyle? This would be a huge mistake. Clint can feel a piece of lint that fell on this car 5 miles away. I think he would have immediately realized that someone was in that car. He probably also knew the exact mileage on that car's odometer. Letting Kyle drive this car would mean the end of my marriage. Is this what I wanted? I think, even subconsciously, I didn't want Client to disappear from my life. I started sleeping with Kyle to get back at Client for choosing his job over me. Now it seemed stupid and childish. It sounded more like the act of a teenager who was angry at his parents. She gets a tattoo because her parents hate tattoos, but the big ugly tattoo doesn't really hurt her parents. She will have to hide it for the rest of her life. I sat in the darkened room, silently crying, wondering again where Clint was and why he didn't call me. This had never happened before, and again I wondered if he somehow found out about Kyle. I reached out in the dark and hit Kyle. He woke up mumbling and confused. "Go sleep on the couch," I said. "Your damn snoring keeps me awake." "I don't snore," he said. "Damn you snoring," I said. It was like being on a construction site here. "Well, sleep excites me," he said. "I can't help it." I decided at that moment that Kyle had to go. We could make our last night together memorable. "Well, Kyle, I can help you with this," I said gently. "Clint, I woke up in a nightmare. At first I was confused. I had no idea where I was or how I got here. It was very cold and it looked like it was snowing. Something underneath me was very warm and very soft. I tried to straighten up, but something heavy prevented me from doing so. It seemed to be very heavy and made noise when I moved. I think I could have brought it up, but it was smarter to get out from under it. I tried to crawl out and realized that the warm and soft thing underneath me was a person. Suddenly, I remembered everything. The plane crashed. I remained calm. I was alive and could still think. I tried to remember everything that happened and realized that I could do it. This was a good sign. This meant there was probably no brain damage or concussion. I carefully moved and flexed both arms, starting from the shoulders and then to the elbows, wrists, and finally the hands and fingers. Other than a few cuts and abrasions, I had no pain in my arms and had full functionality. Then I did the same with the legs and feet. Everything seemed intact. I took a more thorough inventory and discovered that my biggest complaint was terrible pain in my upper back. I could still move the muscles there, and like I said, I still had full functionality in all my limbs. It must have been a large cut or bruise from something that fell on me. I remembered how I covered Delia with myself when the plane fell. The large structure of the overhead luggage compartment fell on me. I crawled out from under her and turned to Delia. I shook her to wake her up. "Delia, are you okay?" I asked. "I think so," she said sleepily. "I'm cold and my leg hurts a lot." "I'm so sorry, honey," I said. "I'll get you out of here as soon as I'm sure we're safe." I stood up and looked around. It was dark and my eyes slowly adjusted to the lack of light. Several small lights helped with this. I noticed that the plane broke into several pieces, either on impact or during the violent vibrations that followed. I remembered moving Delia and myself several rows ahead of our seat. Now I'm glad I did it. I read somewhere about the safest places during a plane crash. I moved us to one of these places. It paid off. The section of the plane we were in was fairly intact. However, everything ahead of us was like an accordion after a blow. In cars, this is called the crumple zone. This is an area of the front of the car that is designed to fold down to absorb the impact of a collision and protect the occupants. The plane wasn't designed that way, but the front of the plane and everyone in it died to protect us from the impact. In this zone of incredible destruction, nothing moved. All I saw was mangled metal. I could barely make out a few torn body parts among the chaos, and then I saw her. It was the flight attendant who told Delia and me that we would land in an hour. Her body was severely mutilated and crushed. Her face was torn apart, and through all this horror, when I met mine, her mouth moved as if she was trying to say something, and then the sparkle in that eye went out. He looked without focus into nothingness. Her pain was clearly over. The plane's skin broke and snow fell thickly into the plane. I felt something else. It was a pungent and familiar smell. It smelled like gas. Hell, it's probably jet fuel. With the fire burning, it was very likely that it was only a matter of time before parts of the plane began to burn or explode. I looked at Delia. "Delia, we have to get out of here," I said. "I like it better when you call me sweetheart," she said. I grabbed her arm and tried to pull her out from under the luggage compartment, and I heard her scream. "Clint, stop. she screamed. My leg is stuck. I knelt down and began to examine her left leg. I felt her from thigh to foot. She was free until the very end. It's not the leg that hurts, but you can do it any time, she said. I have many body parts that you can feel. Sorry, I said. I was just trying to understand what was going on. And to tell you the truth, you didn't say which leg hurt, so I started with the closest one. Despite the pain, she simply smiled at me. I began to examine the other leg and realized that her lower leg from knee to ankle was stuck between the seat we were sitting on and the seat in front of us. There was no way to free her without moving that seat or cutting off her leg. At the same time, the smell of volatile jet fuel became stronger and stronger. It was only a matter of time before the part of the plane we were in caught fire. Crap, I shouted. I think you need to free my leg first, she chuckled. We would enjoy it more that way. Ha ha, I laughed. What a sense of humor. Who's kidding, she said. I looked around to find something useful. There must be an emergency toolkit somewhere. I didn't find anything. And then I noticed one of the destroyed seats. The frame was made of fairly strong steel tubes. I knocked one of them out and returned to Delia. I inserted its end between the seats and applied force, pushing the two seats apart. It worked, and just in time. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the opposite side began to smoke, and small tongues of flame were licking the lining of the walls. We need to get out of here, I said. I applied more force, pushing the seats apart, and suddenly the tube in my hand bent under the tension and the two sections separated. Delia's sudden gasp let me know it was painful. I ran back to the destroyed seat. This time I grabbed two tubes. Delia, this is the last chance, I said. I know your leg hurts. We don't know if it's dislocated or even broken, but you have to move it, no matter how painful it is. The plane will soon catch fire, and we will either get you out of here or burn with it. So as soon as I do this, you have to take your leg out. If I can't take it out, you can still leave, she said sadly. Not an option, I said. I promised you that nothing would happen to you, and I meant it. So get ready to move your foot. This time I inserted both tubes into the gap. I threw all my weight, and the gap between the seats increased. With a loud scream, Delia pulled her leg out as one of the tubes broke and the other bent. Come on, Delia. We must leave, I shouted as the flames approached us. She could barely step on her foot, so I stood in front of her and carried her on my back to the open end of the plane. The section of the plane was at least 10 feet above the ground, and the gaping hole we were going to use as an exit had no smooth surfaces, only sharp sheets of metal. I grabbed a piece of carpet and pulled it towards the hole. Sit on it, I shouted. I'll jump. Then you slide down and I will catch you to help you land. Try to keep your sore leg off the ground. I didn't give her a chance to answer. I jumped into the darkness. There were also small lights on the ground. We were in a dense forest, and I saw large pieces of the plane scattered throughout the area. As soon as I landed, I extended my hand towards her. She slid to the edge and then fell into my arms. The tension was quite strong. She was not a little girl. I grabbed her waist and got a full set of big, soft breasts. Clint, if you wanted to kiss my chest, all you had to do was ask, she grinned. This applies to me too, asked a voice behind us. God must care about the bastards, Delia whispered. As soon as I got Delia on her. Well, one good leg, the section of the plane we were on caught fire. I grabbed Delia and practically dragged her towards the plane until we were at a safe distance. What's wrong with her? Asked the loud-voiced guy. That's her leg, I said. She can't walk on it. Damn, this sucks, he said. It's a pity to lose such breasts. You can't lose what you never had and what you'll never get, Delia spat. He simply shrugged and turned away from us. We can handle it, he said. He walked to another part of the plane where his minion and several other people were waiting. There were 2 other men and 1 woman standing there, and another flight attendant tending to another man who appeared to be injured. I noticed that they had time to plunder their part of the plane. The only thing I didn't see was the tail of the plane. I assumed that when the plane hit the ground and broke up, it landed nose first, and the rear of the plane was thrown further out. I noticed that several bodies were lying on the ground, and that a group of survivors had torn off their clothes and were wearing them for additional protection from the cold. One of the men returned inside the section of the plane from which they had come. He called from the plane's doorway, and one of the other men followed him inside. Apparently, he found something else that could be useful to them. "Clint!" I heard Delia scream. I turned around and noticed that the loud-voiced guy had approached her again. I headed back to them. They seemed to be having a heated conversation. "Hey, buddy," the man said with a big smile. "Have you talked to my people? Are you thinking of coming with us?" "Stop lying, you bastard," Delia flared. "He wants you to go with them because you are strong and can probably make it. He thinks that I should stay here with that disabled person on Earth, since neither of us will be able to go as far as he thinks we need to. He also wants to sleep with me before you leave." "I was just being logical," the loud-voiced man said. "Those of us who are in good shape should go that way." He pointed in the direction the plane was flying. "And just leave them here?" I asked. "Listen, buddy, this is Canada. Anyone who stays here will freeze to death long before anyone comes to save us." We were on a small private jet. The pilot was the owner of the company. One of the flight attendants was his wife. Everyone who worked for the company was on board. Nobody is looking for us. We are also stuck in the wilderness. There is no mobile phone signal here. We can't call to be picked up. As you heard on the plane, there's a big winter storm coming here. The plane was flying at about 300 miles per hour, so it was ahead of the storm. The snow will start to get thicker at any moment. If we don't start moving, we'll all die. People who can't keep up with us will only slow everyone down. This is nature, survival of the fittest, and all that. "What does this have to do with you wanting to sleep with me?" Delia asked. "I just thought that." He stammered. "Damn, look at her. Do you even know who she is?" "We'll be fine on our own," I said. "As you know," he said, just as an explosion rocked the section of the plane his friends had just entered. We all turned when we heard screams from inside. The screams suddenly stopped. "Can we take some of those clothes you stole from the other passengers?" I asked. "Delia is cold." He just laughed in my face. "You guys are going to freeze to death," he said. "Why would I waste clothes that survivors could use? Besides, she must be used to walking around without clothes." "To hell with you," Delia spat. "Anytime, anywhere," he smiled back. The woman and the other surviving man approached him. "It's starting to snow," the woman said. "And Josh finally died," the man said. "We have to get out of here, boss." "See you later," he said, and three of them began to leave without looking back. "You probably should have gone with them," Delia said. "You could easily keep up with them." "Why?" I asked. "We were almost 300 miles from our destination when the plane crashed. They're not going to go 300 miles. I noticed that we were flying over a group of small houses when the plane began to fall. They can't be more than a few miles behind us." "Come on, we need to hurry." While I was talking to this idiot, I noticed that the tail of the plane was over there, I said. "Why should we go there?" she asked. "That's where all the supplies on the plane are stored," I said. I turned my back and knelt in front of her. I stood up and carried her further into the forest. It was further than I thought, and the snow was starting to accumulate. When we finally got there, I climbed into the back of the plane. Everything was in disarray. I kicked in the inner door because the handle was broken in the accident. I found several shelves full of blankets. I grabbed a few and carried them outside for Delia to hide while I continued to search. I then found supplies and took one of the blankets and loaded it full of first aid and frozen meals that were served on the plane. I loaded as much as I could carry, along with plenty of soft drinks and water bottles. I also grabbed a few small bottles of liquor. I took a couple of emergency kits with flashlights and a few tools. I tied the corners and tied the blanket into a knot that I could carry and left the damaged part of the plane. I took it all back to Delia. I found a damaged piece of metal skin on the plane, and was able to bend it until one end formed almost at a right angle. I threaded the strap through the rivet hole at the other end. I did it twice to make it stronger. I then threaded one of the blankets through the belt. I laid out several blankets on a makeshift sled. Then I laid Delia on the sled. I wrapped her in the rest of the blankets and placed the packed supplies on the sleigh. "Try to sleep," I told her. "Are you warmer?" She simply nodded. I pulled her on the sled back to where the rest of the plane was. Then I started walking in the direction the plane had come from. Delia talked to me as I walked. The effort kept me warm for the first part of the trip, but my hands started to get cold. I stuffed them into my jacket pockets and continued walking. After an hour or so of walking, I started to get tired. Delia had fallen asleep shortly before. She was exhausted from everything we had been through. The last thing she said to me before she fell asleep was thank you for everything I did for her. I wanted to take a break. It was strange. I usually went for a run every day. I could run 5 or 6 miles without much effort. However, while pulling the sleigh, I seemed to lose strength before we had gone even 2 miles. I knew that if I sat down and took a break for even a few moments, I wouldn't get up again. If I die there in the snow, no one will ever know what happened to me. What will happen to Delia? What will happen to Katie and my family at home? Thoughts of my family kept my legs moving long after I was ready to give up. Finally, I saw them, a group of small houses about half a mile from where I was walking. They were to my left, which made me think I had turned right as I walked. If I had walked straight, I probably would have reached them by now. If I had turned any further to the right, I would almost certainly never have seen them. In the distance, I heard some kind of animal cry. I headed towards the houses. When I finally reached them, I saw a fence surrounding the complex. There were 2 gates. The big ones for cars were locked. However, the small ones, through which only pedestrians could pass, could be opened by simply snapping them into place. I pulled the sleigh through the gate and to the first house I saw. The place turned out to be some kind of hunting lodge that was abandoned. The cabin I chose wasn't the largest, but it seemed the most complete. The front door was locked. I returned to the largest building. It seemed to be an office. I knocked down the door. The rotting wood made it easy. Behind the table, as I had hoped, there was a board with the keys to all the houses. I took the keys to house number 6 and returned. I opened the door and pulled Delia inside. The house had a fireplace, but no wood. I walked around the rest of the houses and found only a few small pieces. But behind the main house, I found a large pile of firewood. The top wood was already wet. I took as much wood as I could carry and carried it back to cabin number 6. I stacked the wood in the fireplace and unpacked the blanket in which our supplies were wrapped. In one of the emergency kits, I found several matchboxes. I found some old newspapers in the cabin and layered them with firewood. I set fire to the newspapers, and soon we had a good fire. I dragged Delia closer to the fire. There was a sofa there. I pulled him closer to the fire. I placed one of the blankets on the sofa and laid Delia down on it. Using one of the flashlights, I examined her ankle. It was swollen. I felt it carefully and did not feel any significant differences between it and the uninjured ankle. I wrapped her ankle with an elastic bandage from one of the medical kits. I then spread her legs to examine her knee. "I was wondering when you'd get around to it," she said. "Do you want me to take off my skirt to make it easier for you?" "I was trying to see if your knee was as badly damaged as your ankle," I said. "So you don't like my legs?" she grinned. "Of course they do. I mean, no. Your legs are fine. I just wanted to see if your knee was hurt," I stammered. Her face smiled at me. She shook her head. "Where are we? Where do we get all these things from? I'm still a little cold, but I'm not freezing to death." "Clint, you are a savior," she said. I let her hold the flashlight while I examined her knee. Unlike the ankle, the knee was not swollen. It was only bruised. Based on the sprains I've had while running and other sports, I estimate that the knee will be better in 3 to 4 days. The ankle will take a week before she can put any weight on it. Delia yawned and took off her jacket. Seeing her in just a blouse reminded me how well put together she was. I gave her a can of juice, and she started drinking it while I added another log to the fire. I figured we'd need a few extra logs throughout the night to stay warm, so I set the alarm for 3 o'clock. "I just wish we had something to put in this juice," she said. "After everything we've been through, we deserve it." I went to the package and placed it outside on the front porch. The food was wrapped in plastic bags, so even if any animals could get over the fence, I didn't think they could smell it. I took a small bottle of liquor with me. I walked over to the couch and took a can of orange juice from Delia. I poured vodka into it and returned it back. Then I took off my shoes, took a blanket from the pile, and stretched out in front of the fire. "Nope, cowboy. Come up here to this sofa with me," she said. "I promise I won't use you in my dreams. We need each other's body warmth to keep us warm." A few minutes later, I was lying on the big comfy couch with her, under a blanket, in front of a softly burning fire as the snow piled up outside. Falling asleep from fatigue, I wondered how the loud-voiced bastard and his group were doing. Katie. Morning came, and Kyle reappeared in my room with him. He was naked. Okay, I said, and the next moment he tried to have sex. When he hit me, my thoughts were elsewhere. 2 days after Thanksgiving meant it was the end of the month. This meant that Kyle's rent had to be paid, and since I did not give him money, he tried to earn money for rent. I usually expected mindless, emotionless sex from him. This morning, however, my thoughts were elsewhere. It was Saturday, so the office was closed. But as if to confirm how incompatible we were, the phone rang. "Kyle, get away from me," I growled. "I need to answer the phone." I reached out to the table by the bed and managed to grab the phone at the last moment so that it wouldn't go to the answering machine. "Hi, Katie, it's Frank," he said. My heart sank. "Have you heard anything from Clint?" "No," I said. "Did not hear." "Look, Katie, I didn't want to send him away on such short notice, especially during the Thanksgiving holiday, but you know I consider Clint like a son. And when a father has an idea, his son must implement it. When I leave the business, it will all pay off." I almost went into shock. Clint always told people that someday he would be in charge, but I think he thought he would be a manager or a managing president, not that the business would be his. "What about your daughter?" I asked. "I love my daughter," he said. "I will leave all my personal assets to her. She will be very rich, but it took me a lifetime to build this business. Sally will just sell it. So I'm leaving my money to her, but I'm leaving the business to someone who loves it as much as I do. Perhaps one of your children can inherit it. I hope the son will be named after me." That was a hint. "But please don't tell client about any of this. In any case, if he calls you, tell him to contact me immediately." "I'll tell you, Frank, but do you have any idea why he didn't call me or you?" I asked. I talked to these Canadian guys on the phone several times. These guys are workaholics, and our Thanksgiving is not a holiday for them. If Clint had met them as soon as he got off the plane yesterday, they had probably been meeting all evening and all night. "Clint probably figured he could wrap things up faster and get home to you," he said. "With luck, he can already fly home. I sent him on a private business jet and—" "Frank, I have another call," I said, interrupting him. "I'll tell him to call you as soon as possible. And let's call the first boy Frank. Hell, if it's a girl, her name will be Frankie." As soon as I hung up, I turned to Kyle. "Go away. I think Clint is already on his way home," I said. "But what about?" he began. "Kyle, do you want to be pleased or do you want rent?" I asked. "Why can't I have both?" he whined. "I love you so much. My new song is all about you. It's called, 'Why Are You So Cold?'" I burst out laughing. "Kyle, I know a lot of black people and none of them actually talk like that," I said. I wrote him a check, then gathered his things and pushed him out the door, trying not to laugh. It could have been worse. He could try to perform it for me. I cleaned the house like a woman possessed. I needed to destroy all traces of Kyle before Clint returned. It was so like him to work all night just to get back to me. Another thought that was running through my head was that Frank was going to leave his business to us. We will become millionaires. Our retirement will be spent traveling the world and living in luxury. I decided to start working on the kids as soon as Clint returned. Later that evening, Frank called again. I told him I still hadn't heard from Clint. "Katie, honey, I have bad news for you," he said. "Did he call you?" I asked excitedly. "When will he come home?" "Katie, the plane hasn't landed," he said. "He disappeared somewhere between Detroit and Buffalo Gap." I was shocked. I could barely concentrate on what he was saying. "We don't know anything bad happened," he said. "If there had been an accident or a plane crashed, we would have known about it. We just have to be patient and wait for news." I called his parents and mine and told them what was happening. The first week I sat on the phone around the clock. Our parents, either Clint's or mine, were always with me. Frank called every day. A week later, life returned to normal. I was still in contact with the American and Canadian authorities, but there was no news. Then Kyle came to visit me. He obviously only came back because he needed the money, but I didn't care. I'm tired of being alone. Kyle told me he missed me. He said he loved me and a week was too long for us to be apart. He claimed to have written several songs about me. I didn't care. I was just glad to have something to focus on other than wondering where my husband was. Kyle was with me when the plane was discovered. The plane broke into 3 or 4 pieces when it hit the ground. There were multiple fires and explosions either in the air or on the ground after the impact. They were checking the company's computer systems to find out how many passengers were on the plane that day. Due to recent bookings, there was no exact way to know. Clint was one of those last bookings. We showed the authorities the receipt Frank had with the flight information as proof that Clint was on board. The official passenger list showed only 13 people on board. But if the latest reservations did arrive and were on the plane, there could have been 15 passengers or 20 people if you included the crew and 2 flight attendants. If you include a body on the ground near one of the parts of the plane, there were 15 bodies. The authorities, of course, hoped that was all. 15 official passengers, 15 bodies. This way they could pack everything into a neat little package. DNA would still be needed for identification, but the whole thing would be complete. I cried for 3 days straight. Kyle was with me the whole time. I no longer cared who saw him. 2 days later, all hell broke loose. They found, purely by chance, something that forced them to resume their search. One of the teams traveling to help investigate the crash was a Canadian company north of the crash site. On their way to the site, they came across 3 bodies. The 2 bodies were male. The third was a woman. The woman was wearing a jacket with the airline logo. Apparently, 3 survived the crash and froze to death while trying to reach safety. The nearest town was more than 100 miles away. It was a stupid attempt. They would never have made it. One of the men died with his mouth open, as if he was still talking when death overtook him. Frank and I went to the site to identify the bodies. We have already seen all the bodies except those that were badly burned and needed DNA identification. Neither body was Clint. That night after sex, Kyle asked me when we would receive a check from the insurance company. Clint. I woke up the next morning and realized that the fire had gone out. My hand, the one on which the watch was under Delta. This explained why I didn't hear the alarm. Both my arms hugged her. It was a very intimate position, and I immediately felt guilty. "Delia, wake up," I said. "I'm not sleeping," she answered cheerfully. "We need to get up," I said. "No, no need. I feel warm and comfortable. Why should I go somewhere?" she asked. She turned and looked at me. Her blue-green eyes were incredible. Our faces were so close to each other that it took all my self-control not to kiss her. "Give me one reason why we need to get up," she asked. "Breakfast," I said. "Okay, that's a good reason," she said. "Do we have breakfast?" I nodded. "And lunch and dinner too. If we are careful and eat 2 meals a day, with chips or nuts for lunch, I estimate we have enough food to last us more than a week. I think your ankle will be healed by then." If no one finds us by then, we'll both go back to the plane and get more. That sounds like a plan to me, she said. Let's eat. I lit a fire and used the grate that was already there to heat up the ready-to-eat food. There were even a few plates in the kitchen. After breakfast, I explored the lodge. There was a sleeping loft that could be reached by stairs, but it was too far from the fireplace to be useful. There was no other source of heat in the house, so it looks like we'll have to sleep by the fire. I was about to go to the other houses to explore when I discovered that we were covered in snow. I spent the rest of the day talking to Delia. Although the conversations were extremely superficial, the growing closeness between us was undeniable. Delia seemed to enjoy teasing me and testing my boundaries. We could talk about the most innocent topics when she would just stare at me with her bluish-green eyes and say, "You like me, don't you?" Or when I told her that I needed to push through the snow to get more firewood before it ran out, she would really bug me. "It's very cold there," she said. "I know," I said, "but I can't let you freeze." "You really can't," she said innocently. I made several trips and stacked enough wood right outside the door to keep us warm for a couple of days. Delia just smiled at me. "Are you cold?" she asked. "Not really," I said. "I think it worked," she said. "I warmed you up a little so you wouldn't get cold while I collected firewood for us." Then she just started laughing for no reason. "What's so funny?" I asked. "You got wood from me to collect wood for me," she laughed. I went out onto the porch and grabbed the blanket with all our supplies. I let her look at our dinner selections. She chose the meatloaf and I chose the chicken parmesan, which looked delicious on the package. After dinner, I took one of the water bottles and used it to wash our dishes using the soap I found in the kitchen under the sink. I was glad we had a sink. It would be much better if we had running water. "I haven't gotten off my butt all day except to limp to the back door to use the composting toilet," she said. "But I'm tired. Are you going to sleep?" I hesitated. "Come on, Clint," she said. "It's getting dark and we have nothing else to do. So throw a couple of logs on the fire and crawl under this blanket with me." We had a good talk before falling asleep. Delia told me her life story and didn't hide anything this time. I was completely wrong about her. She was not at all what I thought. Her father was a store owner. He raised her to be a good girl. She married her high school sweetheart when they were both 18. He joined the army and they decided to put off having children until he left the service and went to college. He extended his service another term to maximize his military benefits. Everything was going well. They bought a house and began preparing for his imminent return to civilian life. David has always been a very gentle but protective person. He was funny, shy, and very loyal to both her and his country. He was so clumsy that he could not dance to save his life. He always tripped over something or stepped on her feet when he tried to dance. She wore a beautiful dress with steel-toe work boots to their prom, and they danced, or tried to dance, all evening. Right before he took her home, with her parents' permission, he proposed to her. She loved him with all her heart and was sure he felt the same. He fell in love with her mind even before her body began to develop. And even when her body wasn't ideal for their age, he never wavered. When she sat at home and dreamed of being taller and slimmer, he simply laughed and said how glad he was that she was not like that. The day before he was to return home for good, he tripped and fell for the last time. The wire he tripped over ensured that he would never rise again. She was devastated. The fat, cheerful girl who had the whole world in the palm of her hand, who loved to plant flowers and dreamed of becoming a mother, never returned. She returned to her parents after selling the house. It took her almost 4 years to cope with his death and begin to function. At 28, she got her first job as a waitress at a local restaurant. She became a good waitress over the years, but she never got used to some of the customers' rude comments about her body, especially her breasts. They never seemed to stop growing. Some men were too obvious in their desires. They even tried to deceive her. They bet her different amounts of money that her breasts were not real. "How can I prove they are real?" she asked. "Let me touch them," one man said. "Once you prove that they are real, I will give you the money. There was a nightclub next to the restaurant. The owner and several girls were her clients. She was offered the opportunity to dance in a club for 4 times the money she made at the restaurant, and she turned it down. She was uncomfortable showing her body. A couple of years later, the owner had a side job. He had a website where he posted photographs of many of his dancers. At first, the site made a lot of money, but over the past few years, he noticed that the trend had changed. Men are tired of looking at skinny blondes with big fake breasts. Most of the men he spoke to were more interested in women who looked like real girls next door. There was something truly arousing about seeing a woman who looked like my real-life neighbor naked. Her so-called flaws only added to her attractiveness. If her father hadn't gotten very sick and her mother didn't need help with medical bills, she never would have done it. However, she immediately became popular. She bought a camera with a wireless remote control and took all the photos herself in the privacy of her home. A few weeks later, she quit her job at the restaurant. She, for some reason, needed me to know that she had never done anything with men or had sex on camera. She also never did anything sexual with a woman. The only thing she did was post a new series of photos of herself in different stages of undress every week. She posted some teasing photos that everyone could see and much more explicit photos that you had to purchase a membership to her site to view. She made very good money, but always expected the market to crash or men to lose interest in her body type. Over the past few years, she has started fulfilling requests. The client could suggest poses he wanted to see or things he wanted her to wear. She received a lot of money for this. She also started making videos. Again, all her photos and videos were solo. Her father passed away several years ago, and her mother followed him within a surprisingly short time. This left her with no immediate family and no relatives at all, except for the aunt she had just visited. It also left her with a hole in her heart. She had met many men over the years, purely for business purposes, but had never dated any of them. She became an expert in arousing a man. Using sexual innuendo and flirting was a big part of her arsenal. It's funny that she's only had one sexual partner since David died. Tacky took care of all her needs, so if she got too excited after a photo shoot, Tacky would help her relax. She became an expert at instantly understanding what people wanted from her, and also to keep myself at a distance from people who wanted to use her. "You remind me of David in many ways, Clint," she said as we lay together on the couch. "You have the same shyness and the same protective nature. And when you talk to me, you really look into my eyes, not into my chest. But if I look straight at you, you look away. And you really like me," she said. "I know that you are married, and your inner Boy Scout will not allow you to take what I want to give you. But I want you so much that I won't stop trying." "But Delia, we're both good people," I said, "and good people don't cheat." "I don't cheat on anyone," she said. "There is no one in my life except you." "But good women don't sleep with married men, or at least don't have sex with them," I said. She burst out laughing again. "See what I'm talking about?" she laughed. "I just told you that I make a living by getting naked on the internet. I'm an internet-accessible girl, and you still think I'm a good person. Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Delia," I said. And as she pressed her soft, feminine body against mine, I wished that I wasn't the Boy Scout she thought I was. Katie, I didn't know how I should feel. The man I was supposed to spend my entire life with was missing and presumed dead. On the one hand, Frank and Clint's family assured me that he was still alive. In fact, the entire Connors family acted as if they had no doubt that he was alive and just stuck somewhere without cell service. His brother Chuck especially insisted on this. He was the one who constantly reminded me that Christmas dinner that year would be at his house, and he expected Clint and I to be there. On the other hand, there was an insurance company. It was clear they didn't care about Clint, or me for that matter. They categorically refused to pay a single cent without a verified death certificate. They wanted to get a confirmed DNA test to make sure one of those bodies was actually Clint's before they started looking into the claim. My parents, of course, were more realistic. They began to hint at organizing a funeral. In the end, I just told everyone to leave me alone. I told them I didn't want or need any visitors or well-wishers. I just needed to think things through. To do this, I needed to be alone with my thoughts. The reality, of course, was somewhere in the middle. I needed to figure out what I really wanted. For most of my life, I was supported by either my parents or Clint, and therefore they controlled the financial flow. I had insurance on Clint for $250,000. In the event of an accident, she would pay double the amount. If they couldn't prove some negligence on the part of the crew, I'd have $500,000 of my own money. As much as I loved Clint, it was a lot of money. Of course, if Clint came back, we'd be a lot richer in a few years. But there is quite a big difference between we and I. Kyle was a different story. He sensed a big jackpot and wanted to be in on it. He was especially nice to me and constantly told me how much he loved me. Every chance he got, he rubbed himself against me and tried to have sex with me. For some reason, he really believed that he could sleep with me and get some of my money. But I have to admit that his presence distracted me. I just wanted it all to end, one way or another. I either wanted my husband back or a big check, and I hadn't yet decided which I wanted more. Then I decided to leave Kyle for two reasons. The first was that although I didn't love him, I could control him, and I liked it. My life with Clint, and probably with any other man, would be a series of compromises. With Kyle, I was clearly in charge. If I wanted to force him to pleasure me all night without giving him any satisfaction, he would have no choice but to do what I want. The bitch in me loved it. The second reason was that I didn't want to be alone again. And when most men heard the word widow next to your name, it was like the kiss of death. Half of them wanted nothing to do with you because they thought you were a loser, and the other half felt too sorry for you to try to sleep with you. I was still balancing between wanting Clint back and wanting the insurance money, but I was really leaning towards getting Clint back. Last night, while Kyle was rubbing himself against me, I was imagining what my children would look like or act like around him. I decided that it was better not to have children at all than to have them with Kyle. Delilah, 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 I thought to myself. Only you could get into a plane crash and come out of it happy. I was locked in a remote cabin in the Canadian wilderness with Clint for almost a week, and every day we became closer. He was the first man who had any interest in me since, well, in a long time, and my body reacted to long-term abstinence from sex in a very energetic way. The only thing stronger than my feelings for him was the disappointment that we hadn't had sex yet. If I could somehow stay with this man, I would make him the happiest man on earth. Apart from all his wonderful qualities and the fact that I was sure that he had the same feelings for me that I felt for him, I loved that he tried so desperately to remain faithful to his wife. A few days ago, we discovered that we both had bricks in our jackets. Brick is a telephone without connection. His iPhone, although not in use, was nearly dead. My Samsung still had 75% charge. With the last drop of charge left in his phone, he showed me a couple of photos of his wife and one of his cars. I laughed, but to be honest, I was more interested in the car. Anything he loved enough to have photographs of could compete for his attention. His wife was funny. She was a tall, thin, bitchy-looking woman. She was someone whom no one in their right mind would ever trust. Even in the photographs, it was clear that she cared more about herself than about him. I decided to lose some weight after I saw her. Nothing too radical. I liked my body, and most men did too. But I could use a couple of inches off my waist. I think this was more of a problem for me than for Clint. Every night his hand was on my stomach, so it couldn't be that bad. Of course, I made sure that every morning his hands were on my breasts before he woke up. I think my desire to lose some weight came from pictures of his wife. This was my only weakness. Her breasts, although fake, were much smaller than mine. They looked like two baseballs glued to a flat chest. Even sex stars now hated this look. They felt like really hard saline bags and didn't move like real breasts. Older women and women who were not married preferred this style. The only advantage of having breasts like this was that they looked really perky when fully clothed. They also didn't move at all. But no man really liked breasts like that, so it was 1 point for real breasts and 2 points for really big real breasts. She also didn't have a butt. It's like her lower back just continues until it splits into two legs. This buttless look was popular in the 70s, but most men now prefer curves. Her type of butt looked good in loose clothes. But in jeans or tight skirts, you could notice that something was missing. This type of butt looks terrible in a thong. Her legs are quite long, but also too thin. He massages the sore leg to help it heal faster. Why another? I think he just likes to feel my legs. Anyway, unfortunately, Clint was right about my ankle. I haven't told him yet, but I can walk on it a little. She gets stronger every day, but so do my feelings for him. I'll hate leaving here. You would think that after spending almost every day with a person, you would need some time away from them. But that hasn't happened yet, and every night I got closer to getting what I wanted. Last night, as we lay on the couch talking, everything changed. We took our usual position. He was behind me. As usual, I tried to secretly rub my butt against him. But this time it was different because he was rubbing too. I became more and more excited. I was afraid to say something so that he wouldn't stop. I very slowly started rubbing one of his hands as it caressed my belly and moved it up so that it barely touched the bottom of my chest with each stroke. I don't think Clint was thinking about what we were doing anymore. We just talked and caressed each other as usual. Soon we started simulating intercourse with each other like there was no tomorrow. I felt so good. I started to unbutton my blouse and really liked the feeling of Clint's hands on my bare skin. I moaned in anticipation of what was to come next, and as soon as the sound left my lips, I felt Clint's entire body tense behind me. "I'm really sorry," he said. He pulled his hands away from me as if I were on fire. "Me too," I said. "It's a shame you stopped. We both have people at home who would be hurt by what we did," he said. "I have Katie and you have Takai." I laughed again. "Clint, there's no one at home," I said. "Takai is short for Hitachi. It's supposedly the most powerful and versatile sex toy. No one has touched my body in years, so forgive me if I enjoyed what we just did." We have to give him credit. Clint showed resilience. "Delilah, I want you to know that if I weren't married, we might have worked out something. I really—" he began. "Shut up, idiot," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I knew that if he told me he loved me, I would take him, and I knew it would be easy because he would let me. If someone had asked me before, would I have sex with a married man? Man, I would laugh in his face. If they asked me about it now, I would say, hell yes, and I would mean it. It turned out that I would do almost anything for the right man, except to destroy the man I love. I was grateful when he made the first move. He pulled me close and started rubbing my belly again. My moans of pleasure were genuine. I was sure that he would never touch me again. This told me that, as I suspected, he wanted me too. There was just a certain place that he wasn't ready to go beyond. "So how do you celebrate Christmas?" he asked, trying to find an innocent topic. I told him how I usually visit my aunt, exchanging a few small gifts with some people I work with. There were several web designers and salespeople who worked on my site that I was on friendly terms with. I knew them for almost 15 years, but I rarely saw them in person. Most of our correspondence took place via the internet. I didn't really have many close people. He tried to change the subject because he thought I was starting to get depressed. "So your ankle seems to be getting stronger," he said. "I think in a couple of days we should try to walk to the plane for food. The snow should melt enough for us to get there easily." "Why don't you go tomorrow?" I asked. He looked at me as if I had hit him. Even in the dark, I could see his reaction. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to," I said. He was silent for a long time. "I already know the answer," I continued. "You don't want to leave me either. You're racking your brain to figure out a way, any way, for us to be together for a few more days. But you don't have to do that. I'll stay here with you as long as you want. I want you to go because if someone found the plane, we'll both be there so they can take us home," he said. "If you get there and someone finds a plane, They probably have a car, and you could drive back here in a few minutes, I said. For a long time, we were both silent. Clint, can we talk about Christmas again? I asked. We can talk about anything, he said. No, we can't, I said sharply, because I could ask you some questions about your feelings for me and your feelings for your bony wife that would make you feel very uncomfortable. It's Christmas, he said. We'll do what you want, I said. We'll wait a couple more days, and then we'll go to the plane to get food. If someone finds the plane, we'll be rescued. I'll go back to my life, and you'll go back to your wife, and no one will ever know what happened between us. Personally, I will remember this and you forever. It will be like a very precious stone that you and I shared and hid from the world. At least that's how I see it. Maybe it will be something you will be ashamed of, so you won't talk about it. In any case, none of us knows what will happen. Anything can happen. The weather may become even colder. There could be a couple more feet of snow. Maybe no one found the plane, and we'll be here for another 2 weeks. So I want you to promise me something. Okay, I promise, he said. I don't know how, but he broke my heart again. No, stupid, I said, trying not to cry. You can't promise until you know what I'm asking. It might be something you don't want to do. Delilah, I really can't think of anything I wouldn't do for you, he said, and I knew that he was serious when he said this. Call it a Christmas wish, I said, but I want you to promise me that if you and I are in this cabin for Christmas, we'll forget about everything that's going on in the world and just belong to each other for a while. We won't mention your wife or mine, sex toy, or whatever. We'll just spend this one day without all our crap and baggage. The room became even quieter. I thought I had gone too far. I knew what I was asking for. I promise, he said. After that, we both fell asleep. We hugged a little tighter than usual, and at night I made a decision. I still had a whole day before we went to the plane. I was going to let him know how I really felt. But the line between us had been crossed, or if not crossed, then we were both determined to get as close to it as possible without crossing it. I woke up the next morning feeling like I was floating on a cloud. My whole body was trembling like never before in my life. Just before breakfast, I began to walk around the hut for the first time. I walked slowly and with a slight limp, but I loved the feeling of Clint's eyes on me. While he started the fire and warmed our food, I undid a few buttons on my blouse. When we sat down to breakfast, I noticed that Clint's hands were shaking. Then I noticed where he was looking. I gave him my biggest and brightest smile. "What are you looking at?" I asked, blinking my eyes innocently. Clint nearly choked on his breakfast. My only response was to unbutton my blouse further, giving him an even greater view of my huge breasts covered by my bra. Everything I did that day increased the tension. A little later, Clint grabbed a couple of our spare blankets and a knife from the emergency kit. "What are you doing?" I asked. He turned to me and noticed that I was holding my bra and panties in my hands. I heard him swallow a few steps away from me. "Oh, I'm going to use some water and soap to wash my clothes. We wear the same clothes for more than a week. I'll hang them by the fire so they can dry in the morning," I said. "Now what are you doing?" I asked again. "We only have the light jackets we wore on the plane," he said, picking up a blanket in the center of which he had made a slit. He threw the blanket over me, threading the slit through my head. "Instant poncho," he said. For a moment our eyes met. I was sure he was going to kiss me. "I love that beautiful red hair," he said. He just stood there, looking at me, trying to thread my long hair through the slit in his makeshift poncho. I couldn't stand it anymore. I knew what I had to do. I needed to increase the level of sexuality even more. I held his hands as they gently stroked my hair. "I got a great idea," I said. "Now that I have this, I can wash all the other clothes." I slowly took off my poncho and shook out my long hair. For some reason, men like it when a woman shakes her hair. There are so many commercials on television where a very average-looking woman appears to be the sexiest woman in the world because she shakes her hair, wet or dry, in slow motion. When I shook my hair, my breasts also swayed without support under my blouse. Clint clutched his chest as if he was having trouble breathing. I slowly unbuttoned my blouse and took it off. His eyes were the size of saucers. I slowly rocked my hips as I slid the skirt over my round hips and down my legs. I managed to turn around as I fiddled with the zipper before removing the skirt completely. There was no need to turn around. I just wanted him to see my butt jiggle as I stood up. I remained bent over much longer than necessary. I get so many requests from men who want pictures of me in this position. I enjoyed showing this view to the only man on the planet who could take me in any position at any time he wanted. "Are you taking off your clothes?" "Right here in the middle of the room," he asked shrilly. "I wanted to give you a chance to see what you constantly refuse," I smiled. "We have gone through this dance more than once. You made it clear that you won't take me, so my virtue is safe. Besides, I was going to put the poncho back on. Unless, of course, you want me to leave it off." When it got dark, we had dinner, and the tension between us was so strong that it could have been cut with a knife. As I finished the last bite of my food and carefully licked it off my fingers, I smiled at him. "We have a big day tomorrow, honey. Let's go to bed, or to the sofa." I took off my poncho and lay down on the sofa. I lifted the blanket and motioned for him to join me. He walked towards me slowly, shaking his head. I yawned and pulled his hands towards me. "Nothing has changed here, baby," I said. "It's still the same me. This is the same body you slept with." I placed one of his hands on my stomach. His fingers felt even better on my bare skin. Then I put my other hand on my chest. I felt him quickly tense behind me. I think we both moaned at the same time. He began those slow strokes and caresses that I liked so much. If the world was going to end, this would be the way I would want to go. "Clint, if someone decides to have sex with me at night, please wake me up so I can enjoy it," I said sleepily. "No one but us will ever know." He started stroking my hair and then kissed my neck again. "Good night, Delilah," he whispered. "Clint, Delilah, I've never known anyone like her. Before meeting her, I was so sure of everything. I was confident in my life and in my ridiculous concepts of morality and loyalty. It was like an addiction. My thoughts were always hazy around her. It seemed like the lines between what was right and what was good were always blurred. She single-handedly brought not only many shades of gray into my black and white world, but also red, blue, yellow, and green. She actually introduced me to flowers that I didn't know existed. Although it was terribly wrong, I hoped more than anything that it would soon begin to snow like never before. I wanted an epic snowstorm to start right after we got to the plane. I wanted us to frantically grab enough food for a week or more and head back. While she slept in my arms, I wanted more than anything to hold her as long as possible. One night she rolled over, and now we were lying face to face. These colossal pillows were pressed against my chest. I found both my arms wrapped around her waist and currently holding the softest buttocks I had ever felt. Until this moment, I thought that Katie's firm and muscular buttocks were a work of art. Is it possible that my tastes in what's sexy have changed so quickly? As much as I loved Katie, the choice between making love to her and the body I was so desperately hugging in that moment probably wouldn't have gone the way I always thought it would. Delilah swore no one would ever find out. Should I ever give in to something that was a little wrong? Why, after all, should this be wrong? This will make both Delilah and I immensely happy, so how could that be a bad thing? Happiness is supposedly a good thing. Two people are happy and no one gets hurt. Sounds like a good thing all around. But it was just like most tempting things. It's like addiction or alcohol or 1,000 other things that feel extremely good, but in the long run are just bad for you. As much as I want this, it will only cause me problems in the long run. There are no more secrets left in the world. Nothing can be hidden forever. Sooner or later, Katie would find out, and she would be hurt. I can sacrifice a little temporary happiness to protect my marriage. When I looked at her face, even without makeup, her lips were pink like a rose. I imagined they would taste like the freshest strawberries. I imagined those beautiful green-blue eyes that were now hidden behind her eyelids. What the hell was going on in my head? I never had those thoughts about Katie. Hell, I hated Katie's breasts, even after plastic surgery. They looked great and felt like plastic bags. It was like something she did to impress other women. It was getting light in the hut, and we had to go, although I really didn't want to. Delilah was still unconscious. Should I dare? Perhaps just take a sample for memory. Damn, what's the difference? We'll probably be back here in a few hours. But it's better that she doesn't know. She will try to seduce me even more. I just wanted one small sip. I lowered my head and then veered off course. I pressed my lips not to those big breasts, but to her soft strawberry lips. It seemed like we kissed for hours, but it couldn't last that long. I knew it, she said. It was just an innocent goodbye kiss, I snapped. Keep fooling yourself, she chuckled. I haven't slept for a long time. You just told me everything I needed to know. Like what? I asked. Sorry, I didn't mean to take advantage of you. It was just a kiss. Take advantage of me? She laughed. I told you that you could take me. I wanted you to do this. You just told me something completely different. Her smile could light up the entire forest. Like what? I asked. I'll tell you later. Maybe, she said. We got up from the couch. I went to wash my face and rinse my mouth with a little water from a bottle. She made quite a show of putting on her clothes, slowly pulling her panties up her thick legs. In my dreams, she was begging me to take her harder and faster. Then she pulled up her skirt and put on her blouse. She left it unbuttoned. She probably did it to keep teasing me. An hour later, we were both wrapped in my makeshift ponchos. We each also had another blanket draped over our heads and shoulders. We held hands as we walked through the gate in the direction we had come from so many days ago. I swear it felt like it was just hours ago when we arrived here in the middle of a snowstorm. But that morning the sun was shining, and I heard sounds in the forest around us. The ground was wet from melting snow. Delilah seemed to glow as we walked. It took me almost 2 hours to cover this distance, dragging Delilah and our belongings on a makeshift sled. Of course, I was exhausted and dragging more than my weight in the darkness and blinding snow, hardly knowing where I was going. It took us less than an hour to get back to the back of the plane. She seemed untouched by neither animals nor people. Oh shit, Delilah smiled. Her smile was so bright it was as if she had swallowed the sun. It seems they are not going to save you. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. What do you mean, you aren't going to be saved? I asked. Aren't you going with me? You need salvation from me, she grinned. One more night on this couch, and we'll have sex like rabbits. You cannot even imagine. Well, I have a couple of ideas, I said, clearly as happy as she was, although I didn't want to admit it. I won't have sex with you until we get home, she said, crossing her arms over her chest. Delilah, honey, look at the sky, I said. She looked up. What? She asked. Looks like you'll get your wish, I said. Look at these clouds. I'd say we have an hour or two at most before it starts snowing again. We need to quickly gather as much food and whatever else we can grab, and then haul it back. You called the cabin home? She nodded shyly. Well, let's get down to business, I said, slapping her on the butt. We need to get food and water and go home. We need to get more of these little liquor bottles, she said. I may have to get you drunk. Perhaps it was because the last time I was in this section of the plane it was dark. But now it seemed that something had changed. It seemed like some things had been moved. I chalked it up to the animals. It was still very cold, and the food was in a metal refrigerator, which remained cold. We laid a blanket on the ground and piled all kinds of food and supplies on it. Delilah found a purse that must have belonged to one of the flight attendants or a passenger. She threw some cosmetics and lipstick into the pile. Why is this? I laughed. You do not need it. You are beautiful without it. Oh my God, listen to that compliment, she laughed. If you're so desperate to get between my legs, you should have done it while you had the chance. But I began. Ah, now it's my butt, she laughed. And all this time I thought you were fixated on something else. She turned around and waved her butt at me. Hey, you two, get out of there. A voice shouted from outside the plane. "You're tampering with physical evidence," he said. A stocky officer, clearly an investigator of some sort, resolutely boarded the plane and stared at us. "How the hell am I supposed to figure out how the damn plane went down if people like you keep moving all these things?" he shouted. "This is all. Look at all this. Are you some kind of gravedigger? People died here, and I need to find out all this. And almost alone. The idiots they gave me to help me are stupider than trained monkeys. Hell, I'd rather have monkeys." He looked at what we had done and became even redder. "You ruined everything," he shouted. "How did I?" "That's it. You're under arrest." "Get those cops here now," he shouted again. "How am I supposed to find out all this?" "You could just ask us," I said quietly. "You mean you remember where all this was?" he smiled. "No, you idiot," Delilah screamed. "We were on a damn plane. Come on, arrest us. You will look even more ridiculous and unprofessional than you do now. What kind of investigator are you? You had a chance to be a hero, and now you just look like an idiot." What's your name?" he asked me. "Clint, don't tell him anything," Delilah screamed. "You're Clinton Connors," he shouted. "You're on the list." He was jumping up and down like a child who urgently needed to go to the toilet. "Hey guys," he shouted. "Call a helicopter. I am a hero. I found the only survivors. I saved them alone." "Sit down," he told us. "After everything you've been through, you must be tired and hungry. The helicopter will be here in a few minutes. I am a hero." "You're an asshole," Delilah spat, "and we're not going to land on something that leaves the ground. I won't even get into a truck that's too high off the road." "Why is she mad at me?" he asked. "She should kiss my ass. I saved her. I think she didn't want to be rescued," I said. "I think she had plans for the evening." Less than 10 minutes later, we were holding hands in the back seat of a ranger's Jeep as snow began to fall. "You were wrong," she said. "We didn't have 2 hours. We would have to carry all this food home through the snow." She squeezed my hand tightly. "I wish we could carry all this food home through the snow." An hour later, we were driving through the streets of a fairly modern Canadian city. There were a lot of people who wanted to ask us questions. I called Frank. "Clint, buddy, I knew you were too tough for a little plane crash to stop you," he said. "I'll reschedule your meeting for the first morning. You can go home right after this. Katie is going crazy. All this is killing her. I'll call her and tell her you're okay." "Frank, don't tell her," I said. "I want to surprise her. It will be like those times when guys come back from war and surprise their families." "What?" he said. "Frank, if you tell Kathy that I was found, she will insist that I come home immediately. There will be no meeting." "Damn, good, buddy. Whatever you say," he said. "I won't say a word." An SUV was rented for Delilah. She refused to board the plane. She also wanted to return home to Michigan. It was weird. We both lived in the same state. I needed to stay a few days before I could leave. I had to meet with the Canadians, and then I was on a commercial flight home. I insisted on accompanying her. "It doesn't matter," she said. "We've had a great adventure, and I have a great secret." "What is this?" I asked. "Nothing you need to worry about," she said. "But I have a couple of questions for you." "Okay, ask," I said. "What were you thinking when you looked at my breasts that morning while you thought I was sleeping?" she asked. I hesitated. "Don't even bother, stupid," she chuckled. "I'm pretty sure I already know. But since you won't tell me, I won't tell you my secret. But I'll ask you one more question. If you answer my question, you'll know my secret. If you can't, maybe I should ask your wife." "What question?" I asked. "What kind of man who squeezes a woman's bare breasts and dreams of kissing them will pass by these very breasts and choose to kiss her on the lips?" she asked. Then she gave me one of her Delilah smiles. I was about to say something, but she grabbed me by the neck and kissed me deeply. She then got into a rented truck and drove off without even looking back. I couldn't believe she was just leaving my life. It didn't seem right, but maybe she was right. Maybe what we experienced in that hut was exactly how she described it. We had a great adventure. We had many secret memories that we could not share with anyone. We had something that warmed us when we thought about it, but those memories could destroy our lives. Maybe it would have been better to leave them as just memories and nothing more. Maybe what we thought we had was based on two people, essentially strangers thrown together under the worst possible conditions and allowed codependency to seem like more. For me, it all seemed like the pain of first puppy love. It was as if I had found, in the hallways of my school, a being so unlike any other in my life that it seemed alien and ultra-attractive. And just like the pain of those intense first loves, now that she was gone, there was a dull ache in my heart. Puppy love, that's all it was. Hell, does anyone ever really forget their first love? No, we never do that. We remember her until our last breath, although in the end we marry someone much more practical and therefore more real. Now I needed to put all these impractical thoughts and feelings aside and get back to my much more real, albeit less satisfying life. Time to say goodbye to colors and shades of gray. Life is, after all, black and white. Making a deal with the Canadians was a piece of cake. I received even better conditions than I expected. After all, there was a deal that needed to be concluded. They wanted to make parts, and we wanted them to be made. The only question was money. It seemed so insignificant after the days when it was a matter of survival. I flew home on a plane that was almost the size of a city block and could easily accommodate everyone on my street. I looked around and didn't find any distractions. It was a plane full of black and white people, no colors or shades of gray. When I say black and white people, I don't mean literally, although there were blacks and whites and Hispanics and other races. It's just that none of them were interesting to me. The most interesting part of my trip was at the very end. I walked out into the parking lot and a smile appeared on my face when I saw my Mustang, although my smile quickly faded when I paid for her long-term parking. I sat down and it started right up. Luckily, there was no snow because I was sure that my pony would not have survived the ride home on the snowy road. My car has never seen snow. Hell, except when washing, my car has never been wet. I charged my iPhone in the car on the way home. I was glad that the phone started working as soon as it got a charge. All the messages that I missed while I was offline were downloaded from the cloud. There were calls from parents and relatives. And of course, many tearful calls from Katie asking where I was. I was sure that everyone would be happy to see me again, and we would have a lot of time to talk about my experiences, at least the things I could tell them. I didn't think a story about Delilah would be a good idea. I was sure that my voice would give away my feelings for her, and that would be unwise. I decided to record a video of the tearful and joyful moment when Katie saw me for the first time so that we could play it in front of our parents. I knew she would be so shocked to see her husband, whom she thought was dead. I quietly turned the key in the lock and opened the door. I didn't see her in the house, at least not on the first floor. But there was a strange noise coming from the second floor. iPhone in hand, I sneaked up the stairs, ready to surprise my loving wife, but I was the one surprised. The door to our bedroom was open and Katie was lying on our bed. She was lying on her back while some young guy in a bunch of fake gold chains moved on her. My iPhone, ready to record the joyful moment of our reunion, captured in high definition. Joyful event. They were so busy doing what they were doing that they didn't notice me standing in the doorway just 8 feet away. I doubt they would even notice a herd of elephants. I watched as the guy flipped her over and Katie simply complied. I wondered if she was just as bored when we had sex. Has she ever been such a skilled actress with me? I've known her and been married to her probably since Mr. Fake Jewelry was wearing diapers, so I was better able to read her. Katie was just trying to end it. Another thought occurred to me as I watched. Why wasn't I upset? I looked at the scene on the bed as if I were watching it on TV. I really should have been more upset, shouldn't I? Suddenly, as expected, Katie reacted. She turned sharply and slapped the guy in the face. Kyle, she screamed at the top of her lungs, giving me a name that I could include in the divorce papers. Yes, Kyle, I interjected. further humiliating the man who already looked like a beaten dog from her verbal attack. After 6 months of fucking this bitch, you really should have found out what she likes. But don't be upset, buddy. You'll be together for a long time. You'll have plenty of time to make it right. Now, both of you, pack your things and get out of my house. Katie, it was my greatest hope and greatest nightmare in one bottle. Over the past few days, I've been trying to think things through. I finally came around enough to actually do the math. The fact was that there was a big difference between static money and real money. Real money is income. Real money continues to grow and come. Static money is a certain amount, and every time you buy something, it decreases. On paper, $500,000 seemed like a lot of money. I could get some interest if I invested it wisely. If I invested it now, when I'm 35, it would grow with the market until I was ready to retire. They would, depending on luck, turn into a decent amount. But what can I live on until then? I had bills to pay. The car payment, insurance, mortgage, and all the other bills would still need to be paid. There was also the fact that it was very unlikely at this point that the insurance company would admit what happened to Clint as an accident. The scenarios they considered with their teams of investigators were mechanical failure and human error. None of them were random. Most likely, I will only receive $250,000. Living on that amount meant that even if I were very frugal and only spent $25,000 a year, I would be broke by the time I was 45. Even if I could use Clint's pension, I wouldn't be eligible for it until I was 60. This left a big gap during which I would probably have to find a job. And it was all fucking fantastic. There is no way I could live on $25,000 a year. It was simply impossible. It's all Clint's fault. He has spoiled me over the years. He just loved me too much. He taught me that I could have whatever I wanted without lifting a finger for it. The idiot who was now working on me, Kyle, was useless. He will never achieve anything meaningful. The only reason he was still here was because I didn't want to be alone. I had sex with him often because it was the only way to keep him quiet. When we weren't in bed, he would pace around the house mumbling and trying to make absolutely ridiculous things rhyme. There were several times when I wanted to just hit him over the head with a brick, and then keep doing it until it becomes a stain on my floor. If I had to feel guilty, it would have been when Clint was alive. If I didn't feel guilty then, why should I feel it now that he's dead? Damn, Clint, God rest his soul, loved me like no one else. He would want me to be happy. There comes a point when sex slows down in any relationship. I think Kyle and I have reached this point. It's funny, Clint and I never got to that point. Clint literally worshipped me. Once I started remembering how good Clint made me feel when he wasn't at Frank's beck and call, I felt it. Kyle, I screamed at the top of my lungs. I wanted to kill that stupid bastard. I was so angry that it took me a while to formulate my next grievance. He will pay for what he tried to do. Suddenly, I heard a voice. I was too shocked to understand what he said. I probably wouldn't have been able to hear him anyway because of the noise in my ears. I turned and saw my husband, Clint, back from the dead and standing in the doorway. My vision darkened as I realized the situation I was in. I was completely naked, like a girl of easy virtue. Okay, I thought, now I can pass out. But that did not happen. I fell out of bed when Kyle pushed me away as if he had just discovered I had syphilis. He jumped and thrashed around, trying to hide from Clint, who wasn't moving, and at the same time find his clothes. I was still having difficulty breathing. I sucked in a breath and barely exhaled. Violence. I don't think Clint heard me. He just stood in the doorway, smiling. He had a phone in his hands. Who was he going to call? Bitch Buster. I just couldn't understand it. Maybe I'm crazy. It was pointless. Kyle tried to open the window and jump out. He cut his hand on the sharp edge of a metal window latch. He screamed in pain and screamed again when Clint walked up to him with that damn phone in his hand. Kyle, buddy, is it okay if I call you Kyle? He asked. Kyle nodded stupidly. I doubted that he was capable of anything else. None of us could understand why Clint was so happy and calmly talking to him after he caught him having sex with his wife in their marital bed. But he did it. He sat Kyle on a chair and threw his pants and shirt into the hallway. "Here are your clothes if you want to get dressed," he told Kyle. I swear his smile got even wider. Then he turned to me. He, he forced me, Clint, I spat furiously. Clint just sat on the edge of the bed and laughed. "Come on, Katie," he laughed. "You must think I'm as dumb as Kyle to believe that." "Kyle, did you force sex on my wife?" he asked calmly. "Of course not," Kyle spat. "I love her. I'll be a famous rapper someday. Once I become famous, I'll give her everything she wants." "Well, good luck with that," Clint said. "I thought I did it, and look where it got me." He even laughed when our eyes met. Suddenly, I understood why Clint was so damn happy. You never really know people. We were both surprised at the same time. Clint was surprised that he found me in bed with Kyle, and I was surprised that my husband, all these years, had harbored a secret desire to see someone else have me. I started to think that everything could work. "Well," Clint said, still smiling, "I've been very kind and polite considering the circumstances, but I think it's time for you to pack up and leave." "What do you mean, dear?" I asked. "Do you want him to take me again?" In less than half a second, Clint's face changed. The change was so fast and drastic that it seemed as if he had become a different person. "Hell no, you bastard," he spat with complete hatred in his voice and expression. "I don't care what you two do. I just want you both to get out of my house." "BB, but dear, this is our house. I chose it, and you bought it for me," I stammered. "All people choose all sorts of nonsense," he chuckled. "Kids walk past car dealerships and pick out cars. It doesn't mean they own them if they can't pay for them. Your name isn't on the mortgage anywhere. The only way you could claim ownership of the house is if I died." I was shocked by the hatred in his voice. As tears streamed down my face, he seemed to calm down. "Listen, Katie," he said calmly, "maybe you should stay with your parents for a while. Once you hire a lawyer, we can discuss who gets the house while we work out an agreement." "What agreement?" I asked. "The one our lawyers will work out," he said. "I'll start by offering to leave you the bed. I don't think I could ever sleep on it again." "Which lawyers?" I asked. "Why do we need lawyers?" "Oh, hell, Frank told you everything, didn't he? You're so smart, honey. If we're going to get rich, we need to start investing." "What are you babbling about, Katie?" he said. "We're getting a divorce. We need lawyers to file the divorce. I don't want to stand in the way of true love. I hope you and Kyle will be very happy together." Even as I was sinking deeper into shock, I saw him give Kyle a high five. "We're not getting a divorce," I shouted. "No way. The only true love here is you and me. To hell with Kyle." "You already did it," he said. "I have it on video. It will be used as evidence in the divorce." Kyle danced in the background and shook his arm like women in rap videos. "Evidence," he hummed. "E to we to de flesh." The only thing that was solid here was Kyle. There was no way I was going to end up with this asshole. Clint began filming Kyle's pathetic rap. "Kyle, take this phone," I said. Kyle stopped singing and looked at me. "Are you serious?" he asked. He looked a little scared of Clint as I nodded. He turned to Clint, and in the most threatening tone I've ever heard him say, "My woman told me to take your phone, so give it to me." Before Kyle could finish his sentence, Clint punched him in the mouth so hard that Kyle was sent flying. Clint grabbed Kyle by the pants and dragged him out into the hallway and then threw him down the stairs. Then he turned to me. "Get dressed, Katie, and get out, or I'll call the police and show them the footage of you telling Kyle to steal my phone," he said. "But honey, we can fix this," I sobbed. "Get a lawyer and we can start the process," he said. I nodded. "Kyle," I screamed, "get up here and start putting my stuff in my car." "Katie, you're leaving here wearing the clothes you're wearing," he said. "I'm still paying for this Lexus. It's staying here until we decide who gets what." Luckily, Kyle didn't spend all the money I gave him. We had to take a bus to my parents' house. I've never ridden a city bus before. "These are my people," Kyle declared. "Look, I'll give them some. The next moment, Kyle stood up and started rapping. 3 old women grabbed him and threw him off the bus. They looked at me because I walked in with him. I jumped up and walked out myself as his landing looked painful. We finally made it to my parents' house after 2 hours. It was usually a 20-minute ride. I tried to explain to my parents what was going on, but it looked like Clint had already called them. To be fair, he called them to tell me that he would pay my lawyer and not put a hold on my credit cards until the settlement was completed if I agreed not to go into debt. My mother, whom Clint could never refuse, got the rest out of him. She told Dad everything, and they were both furious. They started shouting at me as soon as I rang the doorbell. "It's not that bad," Kyle chimed in. I have serious doubts about Kyle's ability to play the role of a white rapper. It was one thing to watch my hunky husband beat up Kyle, but seeing my 68-year-old father kicking Kyle surprised me. The last thing I saw was Kyle limping down the street as fast as he could with my dad chasing after him. If my mom hadn't forced my dad to move back into the house, who knows what might have happened to Kyle. The divorce was quick and brutal. I got my clothes, my car, and some money. I had to stop there because Clint refused to give in. I tried to go to counseling and call off the divorce. He decided to post a video from his phone on YouTube. A scandal would disgrace my entire family and destroy my personal reputation in the only city where I have ever lived. I asked for a house. My lawyer and my father sat me down and explained the real situation. The reality was that no judge would ever award me more than 50% of our assets. Since I was the guilty party and did this while my husband was presumed dead, I would be an extremely unsympathetic person if the case went to trial. The second fact was that I simply couldn't afford a house even if Clint had given it to me. We lived in a house worth $400,000. We paid about a quarter of its cost. We had about $100,000 in equity in the house. If I wanted the house, I would have to take out the mortgage and pay Clint $50,000. No bank on earth would give a woman who had never worked and had no credit history a mortgage for $300,000. But I thought the woman always got the house, I said. Only if there are children, my lawyer said. The best you can hope for is if the judge orders the house to be sold. Then you might as well buy it if you want it that bad. I told you to give me grandchildren, my mother grumbled. I couldn't believe it had gone this far. I lost my home, my husband, and my marriage because of Kyle and my jealousy of Clint's job. Now that I've been confronted with how hard it is to actually make a living and pay for things I took for granted, I've realized what a fool I've been. Unfortunately, Clint didn't want to hear it. He accepted my apology with dignity and tried to be very fair in the settlement. The only thing he wanted was to get out of our marriage. I couldn't believe that he fell out of love with me so quickly. "What did you expect?" my father said angrily. "You broke his damn heart." Clint ended up getting a loan against our home. He gave me $100,000 to cover my half share in the house and $50,000 in lieu of alimony. I also received half of our investment, which was another $20,000. He even agreed to let me keep my Lexus as a gesture of goodwill, but I had to take over the payments once he transferred it to my name. Once I realized how much the monthly payments and service contract for this car cost, I traded it in for a much cheaper car. The service contract for this car was more than the monthly payment for my new car. I'm moving to an apartment that I can afford. I hoped that after some time, the pain of what I had done would subside and I could start over. It took us less than a week to work out all the details of our divorce, but it seemed like an eternity. The whole family was in turmoil. It looked like Christmas wouldn't be very good this year. I sat on the floor of my new apartment and couldn't hold back my tears. I used to look all over that big old house trying to figure out where Clint hid my Christmas presents. For the first time since I met Clint, I was lonely and miserable on Christmas Day, and the only person I could blame was myself. Clint. My whole life could have been reduced to a scene from a movie. It's the one from The Matrix where Cypher looks at Neo and says, "Why, oh, why didn't I take the blue pill?" I've been working as hard as I can this past week. I worked more hours than ever before, but felt empty. It was not my divorce, although everyone thought so. The only thing that haunted me was regret. Like Cypher, I felt like I made some really shitty choices in a critical situation and ended up ruining my life. I had the chance, night after night, to have a piece of heaven, and I turned it down again and again. What was especially bad was that I thought I was doing a good job. Is this what they meant when they said, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions"? After a few days, even Frank became worried about me. He called me into his office and told me that he thought I was too tense. He thought I needed to take some time off after the plane crash and quickie divorce. I needed to relax and find my happy place. From the moment he said that, I knew what I had to do. I called my real estate agent and asked him to buy something for me. He looked it over for me and said it was ready. The seller was so excited to sell the place that he danced. I could immediately take over the place or start tearing it down to build something new on it. I told him that I was going to go there for a visit and check out the place. I headed to Home Depot and a couple of camping spots. I delivered Christmas gifts to my parents and in-laws. They all seemed to understand that this was the only time I needed time to myself for Christmas. I was sure that my Mustang couldn't make this trip if I was crazy enough to try to drive it. Luckily, I had a Jeep for the winter. It took me over a day to drive through the deepening snow, but what do you expect? This was Canada. My intention was to just spend the day reminiscing and trying to decide what the hell I wanted to do with an abandoned hunting lodge. I could probably rebuild the cabins and modernize them. Perhaps I could turn Cabin 6 into a summer retreat for myself. Hey, why only for yourself? Maybe I could invite the whole company there for a week or weekend in the summer for team building and stress relief. As I arrived at what was now my gate, I noticed the damn car parked next to it. I thought they were squatters. Probably a group of teenagers who lived in the area came here to smoke and kiss. Damn, I was young once. I think normally I wouldn't care. But now I was here and I wanted this place just for me, so I could remember. Opening the fence, I noticed many fresh footprints in the snow. This made it difficult to figure out where they were. Judging by the size of their feet, they seemed like very small children. I laughed when I saw that some of them made snow angels. It was starting to get dark, and children so young would probably have gone home if they were even here. I grabbed the small generator I had brought with me and took it to the porch of Cabin 6. I went back to my Jeep and grabbed a long extension cord and extension cord. Then I grabbed my freezer. It was quite heavy as it was full of food. It was easier to drag it through the snow than to carry it. I decided to take some of it inside. As soon as I opened the door, I noticed the fire. Someone was here and started a fire in my fireplace. "Okay, whoever you are, I'm the owner and I want you out of here now," I shouted loudly. "No, you don't understand," she said, leaving the kitchen. My heart started beating faster as soon as I heard her voice. "Delilah," I gasped. "In the flesh," she grinned. "It took you long enough to get here. I've been waiting for you for several hours." "But how did I? How did you know that I?" "Free yourself from your bony little wife and come to me," she grinned. "No, I divorced that bony wife," I said. "But still." "We made a promise," she said. "If only we were here for Christmas." "I remember," I said. I crossed the distance separating us and took her hand. "But how did you know that I—" "Show up," she said. "You're a divorced guy now, honey. Most divorced guys will do anything for a hot girl." "That's not why I started again. "I know that, Clint," she grinned. "Have you already found the answer to my question?" "Well, not really," I said. "I was busy." "You still have a lot of time," she said. "It's not Christmas yet." "Great," I said. "We can finish unloading the things I brought here." We unloaded my Jeep and looked at each other for a long time while we set everything up. "You were planning to stay here for a while, weren't you?" she said. "I took almost nothing with me. I thought maybe we could stay here for a little while and then go back to our lives." "I just walked here thinking I could be alone to remember," I said. "Remember what?" she asked. "Our time is here," I said shyly. This brought a big smile to my face. With the fire burning and the heater I had brought, I thought we would sleep in the attic at the back of the hut, but Delilah had other ideas. She unbuttoned her blouse, revealing a very sexy, very thin bra. She pulled down her pants. She sat down on the sofa and pulled the blanket over herself. "Get your ass over here," she growled. I ducked behind the covers. "Uh-huh," she said. "First, take off your clothes." I undressed and climbed under the blanket with her. She told me everything she had been through since we broke up. She just went back to her life. But although she did the same things as always, she felt lonely. She missed me. She kept expecting me to write to her. When I reminded her that we had not exchanged contact information, she reminded me that it was not necessary. There aren't many amateur adult film sites on the internet run by a woman named Delilah, she said. I thought you could find me if you really wanted to. We have already started to caress each other. Tell me what happened to you, she said. How did you end up divorced? Just tell me briefly. It's almost midnight, and I want my gift on time. 5 minutes later, she asked me another question. Clint, why were you smiling when that idiot had your bony wife? She asked. Because I didn't have to feel guilty anymore about what you and I did here, I said. And because I just didn't care. It seemed like a great way to get rid of her and get a divorce. And because that's the same answer to the question I asked you, stupid, she chuckled. Have you guessed it yet? I didn't kiss your breasts when I had the chance, I said, because I was stupid. No, darling, she smiled. You kissed me instead of just groping my breasts because when you looked at me, you saw our future together. That's the same reason why I'll gladly give you what I haven't given to any man since. To David, you see me. You see Delilah. You don't just see a pair of big breasts or a nice ass. You love me, stupid. Yes, I do, I told her, and we looked into each other's eyes when snow began to fall outside the window. The first kiss was timid. We made love in all possible positions. We left a few things for the future, but continued until I couldn't anymore. Then, lying together, we fell asleep. Merry Christmas, baby, she muttered. It was the best gift. It wasn't your gift, Dealey, I muttered. The next morning, a very tired Delilah woke me up. Hey, are you going to make me breakfast like back then? She asked. You were the first to wake up, I said. It's your turn. So now that you got me into bed, you don't have to treat me well anymore, huh? She asked. You got what you wanted, so things are different now. You're probably bored with me already, right? Delilah, just go to the freezer, open it, and get some food, I said. She reached for the robe she had left near the sofa. I could see from the expression on her face that she didn't like the way I spoke to her. She opened the freezer and saw a box. She snatched it from there and smiled. This is for me, she asked. I simply nodded. She tore open the packaging like a child enjoying a gift. Inside she found another, smaller one. Inside that one is an even smaller box. There is a ring inside it. Her scream shook the cabin. Are you offering me? She whispered. I nodded. The next moment we were together again. Delilah, I will never be bored with you, and I swear I will make you breakfast every day if you want, I told her. We got married the day after my divorce became official, and almost exactly 9 months after Christmas, our daughter Winter was born. Frank was disappointed, but came to terms when our son Frankie was born a year later. It's strange, but my parents and Katie's parents became godparents to our children. Katie's mom calls herself a stepmom. The children just call her grandma. We all get together for the holidays every year. Katie never came, although we invite her every year. She still, for some reason, seems offended. A few months ago, I met Kyle. He works as a loader at a local supermarket. He also returns carts from the parking lot to the store. As soon as he recognized me, he came over to talk. As far as I know, he still hasn't become famous. End. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.